So we've got some new staff, obviously the senior, Matt's the managing director, but then we've got Dom. Where's Dom? There he is at the film at the back. He's our mortgage advisor now, so if you ever need a mortgage or a remit, give him a bell. We've got Serena, everybody loves Serena, she's sat in the corner, the 4-foot lady in the back. We've got 3 members of staff new. We've got Keisha, she's sat there in her lovely suit. We've got Janice, Matt's mum, and we've got Atia starting on Monday. She's going to be doing lettings and sales, so we've... Hey?
No.
Jan's in Plymouth, mate, she ain't here.
Atia's on holiday in Cornwall, so she'll be back on Monday, but so you guys have some faces to name, names to name. They'll be joining us over the next week. Yeah.
I couldn't hear you, mate, sorry.
Thank you. So a few things to roll out. We are rolling out our new branding as of next month, so this whole building will be covered in the new branding. We've got our core logo, our lettings, our sales, and our mortgages. So you'll see our correspondence sent out. They will look a little bit different from next month. They'll look more similar to this, and this just gives us a little bit more favorable and more unified brand to what we're used to. So, you're all here today for one reason, and that is to find out what Labour are doing to all of your ASTs and your properties. And Toby Martin is going to walk us through that. So without any further delays or ado, I will pass you over to Toby now. Big round of applause, please.
Thank you. I've got quite a loud voice anyway, so... How about now? There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm not used to the microphone, so at some point I'm used to waving my hands around quite a lot, so hopefully you can hear me with and without. But thank you very much. If any of you standing do want a seat that's run down here, I'm not a threat in any way at all. So do have a seat if you like. Thank you very much to Ben and Matt and the team for welcoming me here. It's the first time I've been to R&G Properties and chatting to the team about your first year as R&G Properties and what you've achieved and what you've got planned. I'm frankly astounded. It's clearly a company going places, hugely impressive. So trust me, clients of theirs, you seem to be in very safe hands. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I've been asked here to talk about... Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'll be a quicker.
Oh, you're going to be my clicker? Yeah. I don't mind clicking, it's alright. I'm not a diva. So, yes, I'm here to talk about lettings. And I presume that we've got a fair few landlords in the room today. There's a lot of noise on the lettings front. There's a lot of noise, and it has been for a long time. So what I hope to be able to do is cut through a bit of the noise, clarify exactly what is happening as far as we know, what has happened, what you should know, and generally provide a bit of an overview of what's happened recently in the rental market and what may be to come down the line. But yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that it's been a difficult time as a landlord to get your head around your obligations, what's happening with the sector. We've been through, I think, 15 housing ministers in 15 years. There's been precious little continuity as a landlord. Yeah. Each with their different priorities, their different agendas. So obviously now with the change of government, the hope is that we'll get a bit more, at the very least, clarity and continuity as to what the long-term future holds for landlords. Yeah, thank you. So I'll put some notes on this one as well. So, brief introduction to tell you who I am. So, oh yeah, skip that one, sorry. Okay. Brief introduction to tell you a bit about who I am. My name's Toby. I have various hats. I run a business down the road in Bath. I also have a role with ARLA Property Mark. I'll tell you who they are in a moment if you're unaware. But I'm hugely passionate about what I do and about the rental sector in general. My role with Property Mark, I'm very fortunate that it takes me around the country. It gives me slightly privileged access to briefings, government papers, things like that. I've got a few images there just to show you a little bit about what I do with my days as well as running my business. I kind of have a slightly ambassadorial role in the sector. That's me at the being interviewed at our industry's biggest conference. I enjoy talking, essentially, and sometimes that leads me into some very places. That's me when I was recording a podcast with Phil Spencer, and I run landlord events down the road in Bath as well. So generally, I just get a lot of pleasure out of doing is having conversations, and I do come across a lot of landlords with questions, and I would encourage you, please, do interrupt me at your will. It would be great if this session worked for you in terms of if you have questions, if you have queries, doubts. I may not have all the answers, but someone else in the room might, and if not, I might know someone who does. So I can always come back to you if I can't give you an answer straight away. So please do make the most of this for yourself, and do stick your hand up or just shout out if you'd like to ask anything at all. Yeah. Okay, so a little bit about Property Mark is kind of in that capacity that I'm here today. It's always useful to know, just generally show of hands, is anyone aware of Property Mark? That's fine. Oh, thank you. Okay, good. Mainly the people from R&G Property, which is reassuring. So to those of you who don't, Property Mark is a membership body. They're the property industry's largest membership organisation, with 18,000 members across the country. Those members are generally employees and business owners in the sales and lettings and auctions businesses, and not anybody can be a Property Mark member. The general ethos of Property Mark is that we believe that property is a sector that should be regulated. I'm still astounded that anybody, literally anybody in this room or outside of this room, could wake up tomorrow morning and decide to open their very own lettings and sales business with absolutely no knowledge or experience in the sector. There's no barrier to entry in property, there's no requirements. Anyone could manage your properties tomorrow if they could convince you to give them the keys. So the general ethos of Property Mark is that you must be qualified at least at A-level standard in property with a specific qualification. You have to maintain your qualification with professional development year on year. And you also have to abide by a code of conduct that's actually stricter than the law demands. And speaking of the law, again, it astounds me. I say you can roll out of bed tomorrow morning and open a business. There's more than 180 different pieces of legislation that a landlord has to comply with over the course of a tenancy. 180 different pieces of legislation. So there's a few of them. Those are the kind of there's the industry-specific ones. There's also common law. There's also general health and safety law. These are the ones that apply to tenancies specifically. I'm not going to go through each one of them today. That would be quite dull. But from that perspective, it is a regulated sector. Landlords are heavily regulated, but agencies aren't. So if you could skip on a bit, please, just to go back to that. I like to think of it this way. I see landlords' properties like parents see their children. You want them to be well looked after. You want them ultimately to give something back. You want them to have value. Ultimately, you want them to pay your nursing home bills when you're old. So you wouldn't want your children to be taught by someone who had no teacher training, was unqualified, and didn't do any CPD every year. So why would you want your property to be looked after by someone who also is completely unqualified? Happily, and it's a great relief, I know that R&G Properties are Property Mark accredited, so that's a relief. But yeah, by and large. So yeah, that's my little sales pitch and spiel about Property Mark. So you know who I am and who they are. So I wanted to break this up into three sections. I thought I'd do a quick overview just to give you a bit of context about the rental market, what's going on at the moment, which you'll probably be largely aware of. But there are quite extraordinary things happening in the rental market currently, so it's worth just taking stock. After that, we'll move on to updates that really every landlord should be aware of. We'll have a quick overview of what's happened recently in the world of rental legislation. It sounds very exciting. And then we'll do a bit of crystal ball gazing and look at the new government and what their plans may be. There's a lot of tenants trying to rent properties. A lot of tenants. And on the whole, there's not enough properties for them to rent out. Compared to the last decade, the average over the last decade, the number of properties available on Rightmove at any moment at the minute is about down by 40%. 40% fewer properties available for tenants to rent. But there's not 40% less tenants trying to rent them. There's, if anything, more tenants moving to the West Country. The West Country has been a very popular hotspot post-COVID for people moving away from London and trying to rent those properties. So what that imbalance between tenant demand and the supply of properties has, of course, done is it's driven up rents to the levels that we really haven't ever seen before. This is a quick snapshot, so over on the left there, this is across the southwest as a whole, so including Rightmove, the average rent is currently £1,418 a month. Year on year, that's up by 5.8% just in 1 year. Go back before COVID, and we were quite accustomed to seeing 1 or 2% shifts in rent year on year, but 5.8% is now pretty average. And just in 1 quarter, that's increased by 2%. Generally, we're seeing, although rents are still going up, it's cooling off a little bit. I don't know if that's your experience here locally, but certainly across the southwest, if you look quarter to quarter, just dropping off slightly. That's the winter lull that we always get in December when rents do. But then quarter 2 in 2024 is 1.8% rent increases compared to quarter 2 in 2023, when we're at 0.5. So rents are increasing. But we're seeing on average. Yep, there we go. Thank you. We're seeing on average slightly more properties on the market at the minute, which means that those rent increases, your rent should still be going up, but just maybe slightly more slowly. Sorry, I don't know if it's my bad microphone technique or whatever. But I can do without if you want.
1, 2.
So you'll see an awful lot of headlines like this at the minute. This is actually from the start of the year in The Independent, saying that for every property that goes on the market, on average there's about 11 inquiries per home. And that's an average. I don't know about you guys, but down the road in Bath, what we're seeing is when a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment goes on the market, that's when the bum fights start. That's when you get people pretty much queuing around the block, and it will take us a matter of days to rent those properties. For us in Bath, an average 1-bed is currently renting out at about £1,100 a month. Is that about the same for you? Yeah. And that's all a result of this mismatch between supply and demand. And we'll come back to that a bit later, the reasons why there are fewer properties in the market at the minute. Okay, sorry, it's not quite displayed as it should do, it's misbehaving. But we can still see the essential stuff on here. So average rents, just to give you again this little snapshot, you can't quite see the UK there, but over the last, since 2020, average rents in the southwest have increased by 45.2% in 4 years. I know. And that is actually the most of the whole UK. So you can't quite see all the other regions here, but that is a higher percentage than anywhere else in the UK. And if you could bring on one more slide, please, because obviously inflation has also shot up. But this just for a bit of added context, this adjusts that for inflation. So again, you can see the southwest here is the biggest increase of anywhere in the country. And quite what you put that down to is probably open for debate, but again, I would say big influx of people post-COVID moving out of London into the West Country. It's been a very popular area. Obviously, we're on the commute about into London here, and simply not enough properties coming to the market. Okay, sorry, slightly existential question on the screen, but it's not as scary as it looks. So I wanted to, having had a quick look at just generally what's happened in the rental market with rents, I wanted to have a look at the main focus of I think what most of us are here for, which is what's expected of landlords, what's changed recently, and what plans are for the future. And so I thought I'd start with a bit of context in terms of recent changes that hopefully you're aware of, but if not, would be good for you to know about. And I should have said right at the start, I appreciate that if you're a landlord and you're here, the likelihood is that you're probably a very conscientious, diligent landlord. So I hope I'm not teaching you to suck eggs at any given moment, but please forgive me if I do. I call this painting the fourth bridge because the last few years trying to keep up with legislative changes has been a relentless task. As I mentioned at the start, 15 housing ministers in 15 years has meant continual tweaks, continual amendments, new legislation coming out pretty much all of the time. And so here's a quick snapshot of, over the last 9 years, a number of changes that have made a significant impact on what we do and what you do day to day. I'm not going to dwell on them too much, but just to fly through them, what you should hopefully know about. The Deregulation Act at the top there, well, that's a really important one. That was something that mainly impacted on Section 21 notices. We'll come back to Section 21s later. But that was the act that meant that if you didn't serve particular documents in line with your Section 21, that's all right. If you don't serve, for example, the EPC, the safety certificate, the house rent guide, if you haven't served those documents, then if you try and evict your tenant and it goes to court, you will not be given possession of your property. That was thanks to the deregulation. So that's why it's so important to make sure you have served those mandated documents either at the start of the tenancy or prior to serving a Section 21 notice. Means minimum energy efficiency standards. That's something I'm going to come back to later because that's on the current government's agenda. But back in 2015, that was the act that meant that we could no longer rent out or ban F or G in the energy performance certificate, and that's still the case unless you have one of the exemptions. The Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act, that was the one in 2018 that came in, and that cited 29 different varieties of hazard that a landlord had to make sure weren't in their property. Health and safety requirements, nothing that the tenant might trip over, or fall down, or fall off. That put the health and safety obligations firmly on the landlord to make sure that the property was safe for the tenant. The Tenant Fees Act was the act that capped the deposits that you took from your tenants at the start of the tenancy at 5 weeks' rent, or 6 weeks if you're very lucky and have a very expensive property. That also limited the types of payments that you could take from your tenants. So you have to be very careful now about what you do and you don't ask your tenant to pay for. Chimney sweeping is one that frequently comes up with our landlords. It's not something that is expressly permitted in the Tenant Fees Act, so we can't ask a tenant to pay for it. That's the way that that Act works. You can only ask for payments that are clearly permitted by that Act. Electrical safety standards, hopefully we're all well familiar with that one. EICR every 5 years now. We have to make sure that's in place just like the gas safety certificate. Smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. That one came on in 2015 and was then revised in 2022. All you need to know about that is to make sure you've got a smoke alarm on every floor of your property. And originally you had to have a carbon monoxide alarm if you had a solid fuel burning appliance, such as a wood stove, but they then updated that a couple of years ago to say actually any combustion appliance. So now if you've got a combustion appliance, critically that includes boilers, gas boilers. So if you've got a gas boiler, make sure you've got a carbon monoxide alarm in that room. If you've got a type of fireplace, make sure you've got a carbon monoxide alarm in that room. Anything that combusts. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Except for cookers and hobs, that is the one exemption from that. Right to rent, since 2016, we've been on the forefront of passport control, making sure that only people with the right to live in the UK can rent from us. That's been tweaked over the years in terms of what documents we can and can't accept now. The critical thing with that is to make sure that you are repeating those checks when the tenancy is renewed. So if you've done it at the start of the tenancy, that's great, but you'll have the obligation to repeat that at every tenancy renewal as well. How how to rent guide is a really sneaky one, which means I love it, because I love these little legal foibles. Sorry, I am a complete nerd when it comes to lettings. I love all this. Sometimes it's like they're trying to catch us out. The How to Rent Guide is a document that was written by the government, and it has to be given to every tenant. Full stop. The sneaky thing with this, and there was a new version of the How to Rent Guide was published earlier this year. Occasionally it gets updated with new information. So the sneaky thing with the How to Rent Guide is that, again, coming back to the Deregulation Act, you have to serve the How to Rent Guide to your tenant if you want to be able to successfully evict them. That's one of the boxes you have to tick. But you have to make sure you serve the right version of the How to Rent Guide. You have to make sure you serve the version that was valid when their tenancy began. So if you're serving that retrospectively, for example, when you're giving your tenants Section 21 notice, be careful that you're giving them the version that was valid back when the tenancy started. And there are online archives. Yes. So that's a sneaky little one there. If you're serving it retrospectively, make sure you're serving the one that was current back when your tenancy began. Prescribed information. So this is, again, one of the things you have to serve for a valid Section 21 notice. This is the information about the protection of the tenant's deposit. The reason I put it in here is there was an update on this very recently, just the other week. There was a Section 21 notice that had been thrown out by a judge, and it went to appeal. The landlord appealed it, and that hearing was just a couple of weeks ago. And again, it was thrown out by the judge. So the Section 21 notice was deemed to be invalid. And the reason why was because, strictly speaking, by the letter of the law, the prescribed information about the deposit has to be given to the tenant after the deposit has been paid. And what a lot of landlords do, and what this landlord had done, is they give out the prescribed information with the contract at the very beginning of the process, when the tenant signs the contract, and before they pay their deposit. So this landlord had given the tenant all of the correct information. It's in the wrong order. And this particularly finicky judge went, okay, you got all the right words, but they're in the wrong order, so no, you can't have possession of your property. So that's one you've got to be really careful about. And then finally, on this little catch-up of recent legislative changes for landlords, I put the Renters Reform Bill at the bottom. The Renters Reform Bill, which was first announced in 2019, and then it went on through 2020, 2021, 2023, and just when it looked like it was actually going to become law, and it had gone through 2 readings in the Houses of Parliament, and it got to the Lords, and then some bloke thought it was a great idea to call a general election, and the whole thing got binned. 4 years worth of debate, progress, legislative changes went down the drain. So the Renters Reform Bill, we'll come back to this in a moment, but officially speaking, the Renters Reform Bill is dead. It is no more. It is no longer a bill. Thank you. So that's what has happened. And hopefully most of that is familiar with you. And I know I've blitzed through it all. And if you have any questions about that, do chat to me at the end or chat to the team.
Yeah, the Renters Reform Bill. I believe I read some. You wanted to sell your property under this bill. You won't have to offer it to the tenants, and you have to give 2 years' notice. Is that correct?
So, we'll come back to this later, because I will answer your question. Because obviously, officially, the Renters Reform Bill is no longer happening, because we now got the Renters' Rights Bill, which is an entirely different thing, apparently. But you're quite right. There were certain changes that were going to be made to Section 8 evictions. Section 8, obviously, being the difference between Section 8 and Section 21. Section 8 has some valid reason for ending the tenancy. And one of the reasons was that you were going to sell your property, or that you were going to move back into your property. As far as I know, the the ones, those terms that you've just mentioned, I'm not familiar with. And as far as I know, they are not coming in. Can you remind me what they were? There was.
It was when you went to this to get the property back, we wanted to sell it 2 years and then to the tenants.
That's new to me.
And also, they wanted to buying it.
That's just
Whether
buying it,
that
thank
was
you.
some Mandarin.
Yeah. So,
I don't know.
well, I don't recall that being part of the Tories' plans, but obviously now we're dealing with the Labour government. And I know there has been a lot of speculation about, obviously we've got the Renters Reform Bill, which has now been replaced by the Renters' Rights Bill. And I think that largely the expectation is that the Renters' Rights Bill is going to be a sort of repackaged version of the Renters Reform Bill, but perhaps made a little bit more tenant-friendly, because it's a Labour government, and that's the expectation. And I do remember there being some speculation that perhaps tenants would have to be given first dibs on a property sale at a reasonable price. I haven't yet seen that as part of the new Renters' Rights Bill, and we'll come on to it, and there's going to be a certain amount of crystal ball gazing, because the Renters' Rights Bill has not yet been published, but I will run through in a minute what was under the Renters' Reform Bill, under the Tory government, and how we think that's going to look under the Labour government. But as it currently stands, I don't believe that those are going to be things you have to do. Which I certainly hope that's going to be the case. Ben, could we next slide, please? Okay, so here is your new team. These are the people who are going to be determining the future of the private rental sector. Some strong reactions in the front row. Are we familiar with anyone on the screen? Okay.
One on the left, definitely.
Yeah.
She's in ID for it.
Out of interest. Okay. No, I'm genuinely interested. Quick show of hands. You don't have to join in. But does anyone feel more apprehensive about the Labour government than the Conservative government? Any particular aspect of that in particular? In general?
I just don't get it as politicians at all about the rates going up. Whereas HMO now, what matters is rates going up, maintenance costs. When you're a landlord, the price goes one way, it doesn't go down. Quality of work, you're not so sure. Local authority, which I wouldn't say the word, one of the worst local authorities, worst landlord, documented a majority.
Yeah.
They don't treat, as if you're a leaseholder landlord, they don't need a leaseholder landlord. They're really good. And also, when landlords declare their money to go to their council, there's revenue from taxes. So I can't work out what these politicians don't understand. They should regulate the building industry for one. So if you have work done, get a surveyor in, the surveyor marks it off. Might pay in the long run. You've got the cladding aspect, which is a bloody nightmare, and there was a report by the top surveyor when the cladding came out, condemning the client, cladding, and I found that after a good search on the internet, condemning this cladding. And as for the energy efficiency, I think there's a lot of leadership.
Yeah. I think that, no, thank you very much. I do like hearing people's perspectives. I think the financial, the taxation side of things is interesting because that's obviously, it's still early days in the Labour government, and landlords have obviously been through several years of being quite heavily taxed. We had the Section 24 tax changes that George Osborne brought in that changed landlords from being taxed from profits to total income, which has hit landlords very heavily. Obviously, we've got a budget coming up in about 6 weeks, I think. I don't think they're going to reverse that, but it would be a great surprise if we saw tax breaks being brought in for landlords. So it has been one-way traffic for quite a long time.
There's been a third landlords that left the marketplace. Now, what a Labour, I'm ex-Labour by the way, I'm ex-Labour, 40 years in the Labour Party, no longer. But what I don't understand, what they're saying is, if the landlord gets rid of, said I'm not going to landlord anymore, there's the property, the house doesn't move, the flat doesn't move.
Yeah.
But if you've got 4 tenants in there, you sell it as an asset to a first-time buyer, whoever, where are those 4 tenants going to buy? Are going to rent?
You're talking, and I'm going completely off piece now. We'll come back to it. No, it's great. So I'm a big social media nitwit. I post stuff online all the time, which brings me into contact on some platforms with a lot of sort of, well, for want of a better word, trolls. And there's an awful lot of people out there who have the approach of saying, okay, landlords are selling up in their droves. Great! That means that more people can buy. To which I always say, there are so many people who cannot afford to buy, who need to rent, who need good quality homes to rent. And at the moment, there is insufficient private rental stock, which is putting increased burden on social housing, which is having a knock-on effect of homelessness. So we need a strong and healthy private rented sector. Everybody does. And so I completely agree with you. But unfortunately, that vision is not universally shared by everybody. Sure. Yeah. So Angela Rayner, she's the Secretary of State. I forget the guy's name in the middle. On the right, Matthew Pennycook is an interesting guy. He was the shadow housing minister in opposition. He tabled a lot of amendments to the Renters Reform Bill, as it was. He's heavily invested in this, and he's the chap who is steering the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, as it's been branded. So there we go. Yeah, we won't keep them up there much longer. Don't worry. They're steering the ship. But yeah, Matthew Pennycook, long-term interest in housing. I understand does a lot of work in his constituency on housing. So the silver lining is he has a genuine interest in housing. So I'm hoping that at the very least we're going to get some continuity from a housing minister who is engaged in housing and will remain in place, which is something to start off with anyway. Thanks, Ben. Okay, so the Renters' Rights Bill. Definitely nothing to do with the Renters' Reform Bill at all. It's not the same bill, apparently. It's Labour's bill. It has a lot in common with the Renters' Reform Bill, though. So, as I said earlier, we went through 4 years of debate on the Renters' Reform Bill and it got binned. But one common misconception is that when you read the news headlines about abolishing Section 21 or about having to consider pets in your homes, the common misconception is that they are becoming law now, which is not the case. We have 4 years worth of debate and speculation on the Renters' Reform Bill. These things take a very long time to progress into law. And whilst the Renters' Rights Bill might move more quickly than the Renters' Reform Bill, because a lot of the debate has already taken place, it is having to start from the very beginning all over again. It has to travel through a very specific journey in order to become law, through readings in Parliament, through readings in the law, back into Parliament again. And so none of this will come in overnight. And then even when, and I think it is a when, even when it does get royal assent to become law, there'll then have to be a transitionary period, which under the Renters' Reform Bill was going to be 6 months before it came in for brand new tenancies, 12 months before it came in for ongoing tenancies. None of this will happen overnight is what I'm saying. So I am generally... Yeah.
Section 8 well, but if it's paid for 40 days, 2 months ago, yeah, not
point, and I've got friends who manage properties over in Wales, and they don't know what we're all complaining about. They say, look, our sector needs more regulation. Get it in quick, then everyone knows where they stand, and we can all get on with it. Let's have a quick go through this. So, is anyone particularly concerned about the abolishment of Section 21? Because I think that's the starting point, because that is the aspect of this that we can throw our hat on and say that absolutely will happen. Every single party is in favour for it. There's no opposition to the abolishment of Section 21. Is anyone concerned about that? Okay. It's good. Yeah. So, just in case, Section 21 is the section of the Housing Act that allows a landlord to end a tenancy without having to cite a reason for doing so. But again, there's this common misconception. If you speak to shelter or tenant groups, there's this common misconception. Although you don't have to cite a reason, no landlord ends a tenancy without having a reason. It simply doesn't happen. If you've got a good tenant, you keep them in your home, unless you need to sell, unless you need to move back in. And if you have a bad tenant, then you evict them. Well, guess what? That's going to be no different when you're having to use Section 8. Absolutely no different at all. So in my mind, Section 8 is Section 21 with more red tape. You will still be evicting tenants for the same reasons. You'll still be able to do that, but it will just be a bit more of a convoluted process. So the main difference between Section 21 and Section 8, Section 8 evictions require you to cite a legitimate reason for ending the tenancy. And the other big difference between those two types of eviction is that a Section 8, if your tenant doesn't leave voluntarily, a Section 8 eviction has to have a court hearing. Whereas Section 21 evictions could be done purely on a rubber stamp basis with no hearing required, Section 8 had to have a court hearing. And so the big concern is that by abolishing Section 21 and everyone relying on Section 8, you're going to have log-jammed courts, which are already overloaded anyway. I think the average time across the UK at the minute to evict tenants is about 11. They don't want us to talk about it. It is about...
Trying to get on the phone in that time.
Yeah. The average time is about 11 months to evict through the courts at the moment. So imagine a more congested system, and that is the main source of concern. Not removing Section 21, but the having to go through the courts. And that's why the previous government, the Tories, said, well, we're not going to abolish Section 21 until we've reformed the court process. We're going to digitise it. And we took that as meaning, oh, well, actually, Section 21 isn't going to be abolished for ages, because how long is it going to take to reform the courts? A very, very long time. Labour have not made that clear yet. So I think the only point of concern here is, are Labour going to rush through the abolishment of Section 21, which they said they would do on day one of their government, which they haven't. Are they going to rush that through before comprehensively putting the reforms in place to make sure that these evictions can actually be processed through the courts? So that's the only thing to keep an eye on there. So I said reforming Section 8, as we were mentioning earlier, there is at least acknowledgement that Section 8 will have to be amended. So under the Renters Reform Bill, it was proposed that new grounds were introduced to Section 8 to allow landlords to end a tenancy where they wanted to sell their home, or where a close family member wanted to move in and use that home. And they were going to have stricter eviction processes for antisocial behaviour with tenants. It was going to be easier to evict tenants for grounds based on social behaviour. As long as those are still in the new Renters' Rights Bill, then personally, I would be pretty confident saying to you that you will still be able to take your homes back for the same reasons that you currently do. You will just have a slightly different way of doing it. The right to challenge rent increases. This is something that's been talked about a great deal. Labour are associated by a lot of people with rent controls. Happily, they've made it pretty clear that that's not a route that they're going to go down. They have said that they're not going to give local authorities the power to introduce local rent controls. But they have said that they want to give tenants greater right to challenge unfair rental increases. And this will come up again and again. The bonkers thing is, tenants can already do that. It's not particularly well known. There's already a tribunal system in place where if a landlord says, right, I'm going to double your rent, then the tenant can refer that to a first-tier tribunal. So I think all that means is they're going to reform that, make it better publicised, make it more well-known. But that's already the case. Pets. Again, after a lot of the news headlines, we had so many calls from tenants telling us that it was now illegal to refuse a tenant in your home, in your rental property. You can still refuse to rent to a tenant with a pet if you wish to, and that won't change until this bill goes through. The proposal is that landlords must consider requests for pets and must have a good reason to say no. That obviously opens up a whole world of questions about what sort of... Yeah, exactly. If you have a one-bedroom apartment and somebody with 5 Dobermans wants to rent it, I think you're going to be able to say no. But, one cat, it's probably going to be harder to say no to that tenant. But what goes unsaid in all of this is that actually, whilst the rental market is as it is, and you've got multiple applicants for every property, you're not going to need to say no anyway, because you're going to have someone else trying to rent it who doesn't have a pet, if that's a concern for you. The decent home standard is something that the Conservatives wanted to roll out to the private rented sector. It currently only applies to the social rented sector. And I would say if you're in this room, again, you're a diligent, responsible landlord, you're not going to need to, you're already going to be compliant with that. And we've already got the Homes Business for Human Habitation Act, we've already got other health and safety acts. I don't think there's going to be anything there that is going to dramatically change the obligations that you already have. A couple of these we'll go through a bit more quickly. A digital database, that's going to be a bit more admin. There's going to be an online portal where tenants can look up what their rights are, where landlords can look up what their obligations are, and we'll also probably ask landlords to upload compliance paperwork, their EPC, maybe their gas safety certificate, so that tenants can check that their landlords are compliant. So the answer that's been mooted to this issue of the logjam courts is the introduction of a new ombudsman, a new landlord ombudsman. Currently, your tenants, if they rent through an agent, they do have access to an ombudsman, but it's an ombudsman that regulates the agency. So if R&G Property, which they never would, do something heinous, then they can be penalised through the ombudsman. Not going to happen. But the ombudsman cannot penalise the landlord, only the agency. So the idea is that there will be a landlord ombudsman who tenants can take their grievance to. And the thinking is that this would then alleviate pressure from the courts, who will not be dealing with so many claims because they're being dealt with by an ombudsman. Quite frankly, I think that if the tenant thinks they've got a legal claim against their landlord and the ombudsman doesn't find in their favour, then they're probably going to take it to the courts anyway. So I don't really see that big as much.
It's really bugs me. I don't know when anyone's going to the housing ombudsman. Forget it.
Yeah.
Absolutely useless. You can give them my name on that, and you can see the comments and the reviews. That's what they're like a housing ombudsman who doesn't abide by the law, evidence, common sense, or anything. Look at the comments about the housing ombudsman, and that's what that was complaining. I'm very weary of the landlord ombudsman. I
Just
really,
a bit
really am.
He hates the council.
I worked for him for 26 years.
The ombudsman don't really, as I see it, the ombudsman exists to diffuse complaints, not to reach a just resolution, but to find a resolution that people are prepared to accept. If you want a just resolution, then you have to go to the courts.
Yes.
The ombudsman will just try and find a compromise that people are prepared to accept. Yeah, I don't disagree.
David does not accept.
Sorry?
David does not accept.
Yeah. So then the last two aspects of the Renters' Rights Bill. Clamp down on discrimination against families and benefits. Again, it's already actually illegal to discriminate against those things. This is simply, I think, the Labour Party and previously the Tory Party kind of bumping this back up to the public's attention. I think that both of those, I think, are deemed discriminatory based on case law, because there have been claims through the courts that have been upheld. So I think they're just going to actually write it into law. So there are a specific act that says it's illegal to discriminate against renting to people with children if your property is suitable for a family. So if you have a 3-bedroom house and you have a family who wants to rent it, you could not say no to their offer on the basis that they have kids. Like I say, technically already deemed discriminatory. And the same applies to terms and benefits.
I've got a quick question on that one, because it's happened more and more, and I'm sure you've seen it as a letting agent as well. It's a 3-bed house, and they're a family with 8 children, for example, and that's not exaggerating. I've had that inquiry come through.
Yeah.
Is it deemed suitable or unsuitable? Because then it goes back to actually where we lived previously is absolutely fine. Let's say they came from another country, and that is acceptable over there. It's a kind of a grey area, isn't it?
So, I don't really remember now. There's a legal definition of how to calculate the number of occupiers you can have in a property. And it's extremely generous towards the occupiers, because it counts the living room as a sleeping space. And I think for children you have to allow for 2 children per bedroom. So if you've got a 3-bedroom property, then you've got, 1 room for the adults, and then 2, 4, 6. So two bedrooms with 2 kids in, and then the living space where technically 2 children are allowed to sleep. So technically, I think that probably would be suitable for a family with up to 6 kids, I think.
Yeah,
there's a website.
With the 2 children per bedroom, does in any way, shape or form gender come into that? Because I've had the same conversations with people that go, no, we can't put a boy and a girl in the same room.
Gender, no.
Yeah.
But age, yes.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, there's a point at which it reduces to 1 child at a certain age. It might be 16. But gender, no.
16 genders?
I think there are 16 genders now, yeah. And then finally, ARLA's law, again, and it's funny, we keep coming back to, we find that things that have actually been done very poorly in the social housing sector are then applied to the private rented sector. And it's quite interesting to see that actually social housing has so many issues going on there, which then is being extended out to private landlords. So ARLA's law, if you don't know, that's named after a really tragic incident a few years ago. I think a 4-year-old boy called was in a social housing property that was riddled with mould, and he died through health complications. So there is now a law that applies to the social housing sector that mandates quite strict timeframes in which the landlord has to respond to certain maintenance issues, mould and damp being among those issues. Again, I do feel that if you're a diligent landlord, you're probably already going to be compliant with that. Off the top of my head, I think it's investigate the issues within 14 days, where the tenants have health issues within 7 days, and emergencies must be responded to within 24 hours. Yeah.
We have people who live in the flat downstairs from us and same landlord, and they literally got like their house involved, and then they kind of came up to us and said, "Oh, have you ever had any problems?" So yeah, I think it's because you're not. I don't like you know. It's fine. It's fine.
It's a really valid point, and and under our law, there's an encouragement to local authorities are now encouraged to not accept lifestyle, tenant lifestyle as a valid reason for mould and damp. So the onus is very much put on the landlord. What I would say is, I'll come on to it later, regular inspections. There is...
She should be 3 people over us, you can't.
Do you know some quite there is some quite handy technology now for this. You can get a bit like smoke alarms, but you can get damp sensors to put in properties. Sure. Yeah. 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 That is an issue. And
That's like extractor fans, isn't it?
yeah. I think all you can do to combat that or carry out regular inspections, regularly record keeping, particularly record keeping is so important, not just in terms of the condition of the property, but in terms of the correspondence that you've had with the tenant in advising them what they need to do to help manage those conditions. Do you know, I know it's an extra cost for the landlord, but one of the best things that a landlord can do on day one of the tenancy, a beautiful moving in gift for the tenant, bottle of Kilrock. Literally give them some anti-mold spray, tell them how to use it. If you ever had to defend yourself to the council, it's another thing that you can say that you did. All you can do is try to head off any issues in advance by trying to get out in front of it, meticulously record everything that you've done, and beyond that, I agree. But you have to do. Yeah. I think you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the local authority if they were called in to investigate. Have you got a comprehensive file that you can show them? Of course you do.
This is R&G, maybe.
Yeah. So sadly, evidence is what you need. Okay. Before I move on, any aspect of that anyone is particularly unsettled about or concerned about? Okay, that's a good thing. Okay, we kind of talked about this, so I will skim over it. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that one quickly. So, very briefly, Labour Party's other plans. We talked about shortage of stock. Ultimately, the answer is we need more homes. They have ambitious house building targets. Apparently, they're going to build 300,000 new homes a year, which, hey, it's what we need. Is it realistic?
We can build thousands and thousands of flats. We're students, and we can't build thousands and thousands of flats in social housing. It's all to do with the monopoly money, nothing else, nothing short.
Sure.
And the government don't know because they benefit from the developers.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So since 1979, on average, we've built about 150,000 new homes a year. So this government has got history against them if they're going to try and double that. So I don't believe they can do it, but I would love it if they did. We do desperately need new homes.
You can build them, but they won't pay the money for them.
Yeah.
Because the rents will be subdued in the social market. That's why.
Nick.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Let's skip on. Thanks, mate. Okay, this is the one other aspect of Labour's proposals that I really wanted to touch on. Because I think that, as we've just seen with people's response to the Renters' Rights Bill, for me, this is actually probably more challenging than those proposals. I think we can all deal with what's in the Renters' Rights Bill. It's just a slight shift in the landscape. EPC targets, though, do potentially incur quite a lot of cost for landlords. So, going back to the Conservative Party, they said, right, if you've got a rental property, you can't rent it out if it's Band F or Band G EPC rating. They then proposed that they were going to increase that to Band C. In 2022, they dropped those proposals. But Labour are putting them back on the table. And they're saying that property should be Band C by 2030. And then we'll be starting the whole thing, I'll be standing here in 5 years' time.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit of pain about this because I felt my case, and other people's case, no, that's down to you within a flat. But if you're in a flat within a block, you just do the, especially it's got this awful cladding on there, how can you do an EPC when the freeholder is responsible for the energy conservation of that block? Understand it with a house, but understand it with a flat.
If there's an existing EPC, then it's publicly available. You can get that
Well,
on
I know that,
online
yeah.
register. Yeah.
But if it's coming to run out, they said get one yourself. But if you call in an extra to do an EPC, who's going to do it on the block? Or is he going to do it, or he or she?
If you call in an EPC assessor to do an EPC, then they will solely base it on your single dwelling. They will take into account the construction of the building and what's above and below and
So
side to
if
side.
fails, you fails it for the block.
There may be some variety depending on, for example, top floor flats might get a slightly worse rating because they lose heat through the roof. But if you've got a block of flats, and they should all have pretty similar ratings, unless they've got different heating systems, but they should have similar ratings. But they still have to, each flat would have to be individually assessed. Then.
So a freeholder doesn't have to do EPC for a block. When it comes up, then it's gone past.
Yeah. So the obligation to have the EPC is tied in with the marketing of the property. So you have to have an EPC when the property goes on the market. So it's very much the owner, the landlord, or the seller's obligation to have an EPC carried out when they bring the property to the market.
I've been into this weekly. It's a council, so right. It was a sin. They refused to do a certificate for it, but they write it. But I would think that leaves landlords open, because the council will not do the EPC for private landlords, but will do it for their own. In the same block, the same flats, the same as you're going to have a wash basin, you've got a separate EPC in your flat, because of hygiene reasons, it could be a social tenant next door, exactly the same flat, but you don't have to have a wash basin in your WC because you're a council tenant.
Welcome to Tuesday.
I hope ARLA, I really hope ARLA will take some of these points on, because that lot don't know what they're doing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I should take it on board.
He's not from Labour.
Increase the score by spending £3,500, then you can spend £3,500 trying to improve the EPC, then you can stop, you can register an exemption. So hopefully there will still be, when the Tories were planning this a few years ago, they were planning on increasing but we don't know what Labour. We'll have to wait and see. What I do know is that EPCs are going to be reviewed the way that they're recorded. At the moment, they're not actually very up to date in terms of recognising newer technologies and newer sources of heating. So yeah, that's going to be updated. And I did want to mention that that there are, if you're someone who does need to improve the energy efficiency of rental property, there is currently funding available. There are several schemes which are currently giving out money for home improvements that the landlords are eligible for. One is the boiler upgrade scheme, which is really only if you're looking at installing a heat pump. The Great British Insulation Scheme hasn't been that well promoted, but if you can improve the insulation of your home, then you can get funding as a landlord through that scheme. There's certain criteria that your home has to be banded, I think band D or lower, but there is funding available through various schemes at the moment. So if you need to improve the energy efficiency of your home, it's worth looking at those. The one at the bottom, local energy advice demonstrator projects, that's not funding to improve your home, but there is local authority funding. Here in Bristol, it's through the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and that means that you can have a free assessment. Someone will come in and tell you what your options are.
Just play devil's advocate on people who are moaning about it. Obviously, people that moan about that. So, there's no free and out the property to improve the EPC. You might be down on this as well. So, it would negate that as well. So, I don't see it as bad.
Yeah, I think that generally, broadly, we can all say that having more energy efficient homes is a good thing. We all want to improve the quality of homes. It's just a question, really, especially in an area where, certainly down the road where I come from, Bath, there's a lot of listed buildings, there's a lot of period buildings. Those are the ones which are really difficult to raise the score on. So I think it's just a question of how those exemptions are going to be treated. But yeah, I think if we wait to see what's in the budget, if there are maybe tax incentives or funding available to landlords who are trying to improve the score of their homes, then if they make it practically possible, then it can be a good thing in the long run. Yeah. And then just to finish this bit off, I call this gossip because there's been news headlines about it, but actually I haven't seen anything concrete. The Renters Reform Bill under the Conservatives did away with fixed contracts. They said that every tenancy had to start as a month-to-month rolling tenancy and continue in that manner. So far under Labour there's been no talk of that. It doesn't mean necessarily that they have scrapped it, but it's just not been mentioned. So I'll be quite interested to see whether that comes back. So at the moment, under the Renters' Rights Bill, you could have a 12-month contract. That wasn't the case under the Tory version. Let's see what happens. Yeah. There's been headlines about French-style income assessments prior to eviction. You always know when you want to turn the public tide of opinion against something because you associate it with the French. This was, there was some talk that prior to an eviction, if you've enforced a Section 8 through the court before eviction notice was given, the judge would assess the tenant's circumstances. And actually, if they were struggling, if they were low income, then the judge might be more lenient on them. Again, that's not something that has been actually put forward in a formal proposal yet. And rent caps I mentioned earlier, Labour have been pretty clear they're not going to go down that route. So I just want to clarify that. Good. Good. Okay, so I just wanted to round things off, and thank you very much for your input and for listening. And I know it's been a whistle-stop tour. I just wanted to summarise this with 4 key things that I think are really important for landlords right now. So first of all, annual rent reviews. It sounds really basic, but such has been the increase in rents, the rate at which rents have increased, that if you don't do those annual rent reviews, you will find yourself very quickly with a rent that is well below market rate. And if we are moving towards a system where it is more difficult to bring your rents in line with the market, then you're going to regret not doing that year on year. So even if you're increasing in line with RPI, even if that's all you're doing, it is well worth doing those annual rent reviews. Otherwise, once your rent falls considerably behind market rate, if you then try in 1 year to bring it all the way back up to the market rate, you'll get a big pushback from your tenant. So do those incremental rent reviews. Tenant screening and tenant review.
Good Lord, right.
Fantastic. Absolutely. There's been a big increase over the last couple of years in tenant fraud. That is tenants who are desperate to rent homes providing fraudulent documents to rental referencing agencies. Big increase in rental fraud. So there are now referencing products that help to mitigate that. One is open banking, which gives a referencing company access to the tenant's actual bank transactions, so they can see income coming into the account, they can see rental payments consistently going out of the account. So you want to use a referencing provider that has open banking, which Good Lord does. What Good Lord also has is they have an integration with HMRC. So where someone is self-assessed or self-employed, they can actually verify their self-assessment tax return as part of the referencing through the HMRC system. So Good Lord in particular are really good at clamping down on tenant fraud. Inspections and the bottom 2 go hand in hand, and we mentioned it earlier. You have to be so diligent now at keeping records, at regularly inspecting your property, at recording everything in terms of visits to the property, in terms of the correspondence with the tenant. Sadly, I wish it wasn't this way, but prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Ultimately, if you need to defend yourself against a mold claim through the local authority, or if you need to enforce a Section 8 notice through the courts, you're going to be relying on the evidence that you've prepared before you even knew you were going to have to do that. So the importance of note-keeping and documentation is vital, and if you use an agency, I'm sure that is absolutely taken care of for you. I've blathered on a huge amount and covered an awful lot of ground, so I do hope that wasn't a bit too manic and a bit too full on. If you have any questions, fire away or find me afterwards. If you want to get in contact with me and ask me anything about Property Mark or the rental market, these guys have got you covered. Anything about Property Mark or beyond that, then do feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm all over social media. I welcome it. No, thank you. And once again, thank you so much for asking me here.
Thank you very much, Toby. One more round of applause for Toby and telling you everything about it. We're going to make sure you guys are protected, as Tony's already touched on as well. We offer free renewals. You mentioned, let's get tightened up, get the rent increases done before the bill's passed. We can do that for you, of course. And your discount from managed landlords, you guys already know that. Free mortgage advice and application with Dom. If you're up for a remo or if it's due to go, the rates have just changed. Speak to Dom. Pro-referencing of tenancy, something Toby touched on. We have had one case of tenant fraud. He said that it's a rare thing. It has happened. It happened in Wales as well, where they faked their bank accounts, they faked a landlord reference, they faked an employer's reference. And it's pretty easy to do. If you go on godaddy.co.uk, you can buy any domain for £5.99 and create your own HR Act, whatever domain you want, and then you can fake it. So it's really important that you use pro-referencing to ensure that actually HMRC agree with what the tenant is saying that they earn. 3 monthly property inspections is something we offer as standard, and obviously 3 yearly rent reviews and increases and renewals. So there is no reason why you shouldn't always be contracted up, get the right rent rises with R&G. And with that, I will leave you guys to enjoy it. Thank you very much for coming along today. Pizza is over there if you are hungry. Let's get the tunes on.